JD Vance walked into the small-town diner expecting a warm meal after a long day. Instead, he was met with something completely unexpected. The air inside the restaurant was filled with the comforting scent of fresh coffee and fried potatoes, and the gentle hum of country music played softly in the background. It was the kind of place where locals gathered after a long day, where neighbors knew each other by name, and where the waitresses always had a kind word for their customers. As JD stepped inside, the bell above the door jingled, catching the attention of a waitress named Talia. She was balancing 3 plates on her arm, and despite her busy shift, she still managed a welcoming smile. "Sit anywhere you like," she called out. JD nodded and found a small booth by the window, picking up the menu and glancing over the options. The special of the day was meatloaf with mashed potatoes, a meal that brought back fond memories of his grandmother's cooking. The thought made him smile. Talia soon approached with a glass of water and a notepad in hand. "Welcome to Maple Creek. Can I start you with some coffee?" she asked. JD nodded. "That would be great, thank you." But just as Talia turned to fetch the coffee, something changed in the air. From the kitchen, a woman wearing an apron emerged. The name Melissa was embroidered on the fabric, and her hands were dusted with flour. She stopped abruptly when she saw JD sitting at the booth. Her expression hardened. "Talia," she called sharply. "Come here a minute." Talia hesitated, confused by the urgency in her boss's voice, but she set down her notepad and walked over. Melissa whispered something, her voice hushed but tense. Talia's eyes widened, and she glanced back at JD, uncertainty flickering in her expression. Melissa's face reddened as she spoke, and when she was done, she turned toward JD's table with determination. The entire diner seemed to sense something was happening. Conversation slowed, forks clinked against plates, and eyes subtly turned toward the scene unfolding in front of them. Melissa approached JD, standing firm with her arms crossed. "I'm sorry, but I can't serve you here," she said, her voice tight, but clear. JD blinked, caught off guard. "I'm sorry?" he asked, setting down the menu. Melissa took a breath. "I know who you are, Mr. Vance. I don't agree with your politics, and I don't feel comfortable having you in my restaurant. This is my place, and I get to decide who eats here." The room fell into an eerie silence. A man at the counter set down his coffee cup with an audible clink. All eyes were now on JD, waiting for his reaction. He could feel his face grow warm. His first instinct was to argue, to remind her that businesses shouldn't refuse service over political beliefs. He could have raised his voice, made a scene, or even threatened to share the incident online, knowing that it could spark outrage. But instead, he did something different. JD took a deep breath and let the moment settle. "I understand," he said quietly. He carefully folded the menu and placed it back in its holder. "It's your business. Your choice." His voice carried no anger, no resentment, just calm acceptance. Melissa seemed taken aback. She had been expecting a fight. Instead, JD slid out of the booth, nodded politely, and said, "Thank you for your honesty. Have a good evening." He turned and walked toward the door, the entire diner still watching in stunned silence. The bell jingled softly as he stepped outside into the cool night air. Back in his car, JD sat with his hands on the steering wheel, processing what had just happened. His stomach still ached with hunger, but now there was a weight on his chest, too. He wasn't a stranger to rejection. Life had taught him to expect setbacks, to face hard truths, and to keep moving forward. Through the diner's window, he saw Melissa animatedly talking to the other customers, her hands gesturing as she explained. Some nodded, others looked uncertain. Talia stood near the coffee pot, staring at her shoes, looking uncomfortable. JD reached for his phone and scrolled through his contacts. He found the number he was looking for and pressed call. "Hey," he said when the voice answered. "Remember that thing we talked about last month? I think I found the perfect place." There was a pause on the other end, then a response. JD smiled slightly. "Yeah, tomorrow works. I'll send you the details." He looked back at the diner one last time, its warm golden lights casting a glow against the darkening sky. "Trust me," he said. "This is going to surprise everyone." Talia, meanwhile, couldn't shake the knot in her stomach. She had watched the entire exchange unfold and had expected JD to react with anger. But he hadn't. He had just walked away. "Can you believe it?" Melissa asked as she came to stand beside Talia. "He just walked out, no fuss." Talia hesitated before responding. "Did we have to do that?" she asked quietly. "He was just trying to eat dinner." Melissa's face hardened. "My parents lost their farm because of policies he supports. Can't serve someone like that and feel right about it." Talia nodded slowly, but didn't reply. For the rest of her shift, she tried to push the moment from her mind. But she couldn't forget JD's expression. Not anger, not indignation. Just sadness. Later that night, as she climbed the stairs to her small apartment, she replayed the scene in her head. She stepped inside quietly, not wanting to wake her grandmother, but the small lamp in the living room was already on. "You're late," Eliza, her grandmother, said softly from her chair. Talia sighed, setting her purse on the kitchen counter. "Melissa asked me to stay late and help with inventory." "Something's bothering you," Eliza observed, patting the seat next to her. "Come sit." Talia hesitated before sinking into the couch. She told her grandmother about what had happened at the diner, how JD had been turned away and how he had reacted so unexpectedly. Eliza listened, nodding thoughtfully. "And how did that make you feel?" "Awful," Talia admitted. "Like we did something wrong." Eliza's expression softened. "Maybe you did." Talia blinked in surprise. She had expected reassurance, not quiet agreement. "Melissa has her reasons, I'm sure," Eliza continued. "But turning someone away because you disagree with them, that's not the way I raised you." Talia swallowed hard. "What was I supposed to do?" "Melissa is the boss. I need this job." "I know, dear," Eliza said gently, patting her granddaughter's hand. "But people surprise you sometimes. I just hope JD does something good with this." What Talia didn't know was that JD had already set something in motion. The next morning, a group of people arrived at the diner, not to protest, not to boycott, but to support. What JD had done in response to being turned away was something no one could have predicted, and it was about to change everything.